from the journalism school. We're delighted to have all of you. It's a terrific looking group, and I look forward to a vigorous Q&A session, and especially encourage this good group of students in the room to join in. Our guest today is a very special one, Paul Steiger, whom I've known and admired for many years as we have come up through the journalism ranks together. Paul started in San Francisco, I think, with the Wall Street Journal, and then spent, maybe 15 years with the LA Times, both here and in D.C. So he's already been greeting a number of you, longtime colleagues and friends, and it's fun to welcome you home to an extent. You went back then with the Journal in New York in 83, and I think rose to lead the paper in 91, and were like 16 years as managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, during which time it won about that many Pulitzer Prizes and did all kinds of terrific work, and as all of us know, has really been one of the sources of important reporting. Paul is here with us. Thanks very much, Paul. Not only today, but also over the next couple of days for the Selden Ring judging. As you know, we have a Selden Ring Investigative Reporting Award. Paul is well suited to judge. His new gig, which is now, I guess, a couple of years old, is as every title in the world: CEO, president, founder, whatever it is, of ProPublica, which is a nonprofit investigative reporting organization, as most of you know, based in New York, doing very important work. I see you have a couple of entries in our Selden Ring.
We're trying.
That's right. And interesting in its collaborative work with existing media organizations, and interesting as a really being one of the important new contenders on the front of how we're going to continue the flow of high-quality investigative reporting in an era when the economic challenges of legacy media are great. So we're delighted you're here, Paul, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Geneva. It's great to be back out here in California. I always love coming to California, but particularly in February. I've come from New York by way of Tokyo, and Tokyo was almost as cold as New York. And it's just wonderful to see lots of old friends, and look forward to making some new ones while I'm here. I thought what I'd do is talk a bit about our experience at ProPublica and what our next sets of goals are, and then throw it open to anything that you folks want to talk about. As Geneva said, we're about 2 years old. We opened our doors in January of 2008. We had managed to land 10,000 square feet of space in lower Manhattan at a very cheap rate, because we got it from a Wall Street firm that was going out of business. And when I walked in with a couple of my most crucial, the two of my colleagues are most crucial, Steve Engelberg, the managing editor, who a number of you know, and Dick Toffel, the general manager. And we looked around, and it was like a polo field. It was empty from one end to the other. And in a couple of weeks, it looked like a newsroom that had been hit by a neutron bomb. It had like 35 workstations and no people. But the people came. We had at the time 17 reporting openings. We had 1,400 resumes without advertising. That was not a reflection on us. It was a reflection on the accelerating decline of lots of old bastions of newspapering. And by June of 2008, we did our first stories. The first one was with 60 Minutes, which is probably the largest news venue in America, and the second one was with the Albany Times-Union, which was not large, but it was targeted, and I'll talk about that, why that's important in a minute. By September of 2008, we were essentially fully staffed. And 2009 was our first full year. And I feel like we're about a year ahead of where I thought we would be. I mean, things have so far gone very well for us. I mean, there were, at the outset, what I thought were three major challenges that we faced, and I think we've managed to meet them all. The first one was from a standing start, you know, a name that no one had heard of and nobody knows how to pronounce. Could we get people to return our phone calls? Could we get access to important information that would allow us to carry out our mission, which is to shine a spotlight on abuse of power and failure to uphold the public interest wherever power is, you know, obviously business and government, but also the medical system, the legal system, education, nonprofits, even the media, and you know, by so doing, giving the public the means to carry out change. And so, could we get people to return our phone calls? And the answer was not always, but enough so that we could get the goods. And you build momentum doing this. When you do one story that people see that it's probably a good idea to talk to us about, then the phone calls come back from others more quickly. So we've been able to build on that. And another thing that has helped us is we have terrific, talented people led by the computer-assisted reporting person who I think is the best in the country, Jennifer LaFleur, and Jayla, as we call her, is able to comb records in collaboration with reporters in a way that often obviates the need for getting people to call you back at least right away. So that's an enormous asset. So in any case, we were able to get access to the information that we needed. That was hurdle number one. The second hurdle was could we get existing major media platforms to collaborate with us? And this was a very important part of our strategy. We knew from the outset that our own website would be our default distribution mechanism. Everything that we did would ultimately end up there. But the leverage, if you can get into major newspapers, televisions, television networks, cable, websites, news websites that are way larger than ours, and so on, you can reach many more people, and also you can reach the right people for the right story. And so, having been at two of these organizations, the LA Times and the Wall Street Journal, for essentially my entire career, I knew the tradition of, you know, thank you very much, but if it's not invented here, we're not interested. We don't know where your story's been, you know. But the world has changed. I don't need to tell the people in this room. And also, between Steve Engelberg and me, you know, having been around the business for a long time, we know lots of editors and executive producers, and so we could at least get a chance to make a pitch. And bottom line, there were some, you know, kind of rocky starts, but we've now been on the front page of the New York Times, of USA Today, of the Washington Post, of the LA Times, a couple of times this week, in fact, on the front page of the LA Times. They are a great partner. Chicago Tribune, Denver Post, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, many of the large and mid-sized daily newspapers, plus we've been on 60 Minutes, 2020, CNN, CNBC, public television, public radio, and many of the new news websites. We have not been in the major magazines yet, unless you count the Sunday New York Times magazine, which is kind of a hybrid. It's a magazine and a newspaper. But we've got some things working with magazines that we hope will bear fruit by the summer. So, and why is this important? It's important because it allows us to reach the right audience. Example, I mentioned the Albany Times-Union. One of our first reporters, a young man named Abram Lustgarten, who we got from Fortune, right away jumped on this great story about how deep drilling for natural gas, which has wonderful prospects for American energy, the environment, and the dollar, because there's much more gas than we thought before reachable by these drilling procedures. The only problem is that there are risks to water. These drilling procedures work by drilling a hole as deep as a couple miles, and then ramming tons of water down through that hole, fracturing the shale, and which then allows the gas to bubble up back through the hole. And the trouble is that this water is treated with chemicals, including some that you don't want to have too close to you, to help it carry out this purpose. And then the water coursing through the shale leaches other chemicals out of the shale. So when the water bubbles back up to the surface, you've got to treat it very, very carefully. And this is a national story. It's going on in like 30 states. But the industry has said, or had said for years, that there's never been a case of a spill or leakage of this water that has damaged the water table. And Abram rather easily, I don't want to say easily, reporting's not easy, but it quickly found more than 1,000 examples in which that had taken place. And the governor of New York was about to sign a bill that would, in essence, give the industry carte blanche to drill in the mountains in New York State. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever lived in New York, but in New York, we are as proud of our water as you are as proud of your wine. And I mean, this strikes a chord. So we called Rex Smith, who's the editor of the Albany Times-Union, and said, look, we got this story documenting the risks that can happen here. And Rex said, let me see if I have this right. You're giving me the story for free. It's in the heart of our major coverage area. And all I have to do is squeeze it down from 3,000 words to 1,600 words. I think I can do that. So he put the story on the front page, and it was not a huge audience, but it was the right audience, and the governor changed his policy in midstream. And since then, Abram, over the last year and a half, has taken that coverage to multiple states, plus a 4-page national piece in Business Week, now Bloomberg Business Week, and he just won a pulp for it. But it started with a collaboration with the Albany Times Union. Second example, which I hope I can tell shorter, another of our reporters, Sherry Fink, who's an amazing reporter and also has MD and PhD degrees. You can close your ears, some of you, because it's Stanford that she has them from. And but she went down to New Orleans, and in over a couple of years of reporting, managed to dig out a just chilling narrative about how in one of the major hospitals in New Orleans, that right after Katrina, lost power, the floodwaters were rising, the air conditioning went off, the ventilation machines, they had to kind of ventilate people by hand because even their generators were no longer working. So it was a terrible, difficult situation. But in the course of this, some of the doctors gave patients lethal doses of morphine and other drugs because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to evacuate some of these people. And Sherry got testimony on the record from a couple of doctors who said, yes, indeed, they did that. And it was a terrific narrative, just put you in the room, put you in the hospital, and put you in the place of the patients and the medical personnel. New York Times ran it on the cover of their magazine in August of last year, and the coverage on our site, we got something like 60,000 page views for that story, which is a lot for us for a single story. I don't have precise figures on this, but my estimate is that it was over 1 million page views at the New York Times. And of course, in that magazine, it probably doubles the print readership, doubles what's on the web. So it is. If we had put it just on our site, maybe we would have gotten 120,000 page views. Who knows? But by having it in the New York Times, you can say what you want about old media, they still have big audiences, and so the reach of that story was much greater. So it's very important for us to build these relationships with existing major media, and at the same time that we build up our own website, so that people can we archive all our stuff and they can come to our site and find it. And so I'm thrilled that we were able to overcome the natural apprehension of editors and executive producers for using stuff that they didn't do entirely themselves, and we did it by having our people work with other people's reporters. There were often joint ventures. We did that a lot with the Washington Post, for example. We did it by submitting ourselves entirely to their editing and, of course, their legal vetting. We do our own editing and our own legal vetting, but we were totally open to theirs, including telling their editors who our sources were. We asked the editors not to tell their reporters because we don't want the reporters, yelling at the sources saying, "Why didn't you bring this story to us?" And people have in general, honored that very, 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 very well. So the second question I had, could we get past the traditional apprehension of using stuff from outside? We were able to do that. Third thing that we were able to do was, before we wrote a word, because our funding came from Herb and Marion Sandler, who have funded other moderately lefty causes. The question was, would we tilt to the left? And what I said to people was, I spent the previous 16 years as managing editor of the Wall Street Journal working for CEOs and publishers who were way farther to the right than the Sandlers are to the left, and I was able to do down-the-middle journalism for the Journal, and I expected to be able to do it under the Sandlers' funding. And indeed, I don't say this never comes up. It does sometimes, but we get as much complaint from people on the left as we get now from people on the right, and people on the right quote us just as people on the left do. So I'm pleased about that. I'm not saying that we're totally out of the woods on that score, but I think we're able to convince most people that we're nonpartisan. Very quickly, where do we go from here? The first goal, obviously, is to continue to improve our journalism, to improve our interaction with partners, and we want to do more with radio this year. I mean, public radio in particular is a terrific way to reach large audiences, and we've got some stuff going on there.
You're going to tell us about the Ira Glass story, I'm sure, that we've all read about in journalism.
I come from the tradition that you talk about something after you publish it, rather than before. But different strokes for different folks. And they're Ira and NPR. They're great partners. So, the second thing is to enhance our website. When we first put it up, it was just a quick thing to get rolling. We didn't have much of an archive, so there wasn't much to do. Now we have a huge archive that's growing all the time. We want to make it more accessible, more easy to use, so we're investing effort in that. And then the third thing is to diversify our funding. The Sandlers have been and are, tremendous supporters, and but for IRS reasons, to maintain our nonprofit status, by next year, it's important for us to have at least 10%, and even better, as much as a third of our funding come from elsewhere. We're working hard at that. I mean, last year we had more than $1 million come in from other funders, something over 100 funders, small, medium, and large, and we're hoping to do significantly better than that this year. But it's been very exciting. We are not the solution to the problems that challenge journalism. We have a budget of $10 million a year, which is a lot for something our size, but of our type. But it's a fraction of the billions of dollars in revenue that have been lost in the newspaper industry alone. We cannot be an answer for all of those problems, but I think we're helping show the way for some other similar efforts, most of them with different targets than ours, that are going on, and it's also just very satisfying for me to stay involved with good journalism. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'd be happy to respond to any comments or questions that you might have.
So questions, comments? We'll start with May. You know
May. I know May.
Yeah.
I was sort of wondering, with this nonprofit model for journalism, I mean, everybody's searching for whither goes journalism economically, and this nonprofit model seems to be, do you see it as one of the alternatives for the future, or as a sort of a transition model, and what are some of the inherent dangers in this sort of a model?
Well, I see it part of the solution. In some ways, it's transitional in the sense that we can help carry forward the techniques and ethics of investigative reporting for anyone, both for-profit and non-profit, to pick it up in the future. But I think that if you look at the tremendous upheaval and transformation that's taking place in journalism, I mean, the web is the causative factor. It's the internet that destroyed the business model of the large metro newspaper that for the 40 years of my career was a wonderfully successful model, hugely profitable, 35% profit margins often. But in the process, the web is delivering all kinds of information, announcement news, weather, stats, sports, fashion. My wife designs jewelry and is also a fashion blogger. At New York Fashion Week, there's an organization that had 300 fashion bloggers show up for a set of panel discussions, and they've got 5,000 people registered. I mean, there's the publishing ferment that's going on is enormous. But two areas that are suffering are investigative reporting and foreign reporting. And investigative reporting in particular, it contributed to the barriers to entry under the old model. But under the new fractionated, boutique instead of department store model, the investigative reporting, it becomes, in some respects, like an orchestra or a great museum. It can charge in some areas maybe, but it needs public support to go forward. I think that there are for-profit models that will be able to do investigative reporting, but I also think there will be other nonprofits that will do it, and we can help along with some others. We're not the oldest, and we're not the only in this domain, but we can help show the way.
Yes, Mark?
Why don't you call on people?
That's all right.
That's great.
Yes, Mark Abbott is one of our new and Tommy editors.
How you think your business or you would be approaching things if you weren't trying the focus wasn't on partnering with and getting your stuff placed with mainstream media organizations. And I was struck by your comment on the number of page views you said you had on the New Orleans story. And it seemed like if people knew that ProPublica if it was an online-only publication, this was the place where you would be able to get the type of reporting you would get. Ultimately, you'd be creating an environment and a place, a destination for people to go for that reporting. And you wouldn't have to be focused as much on seeking out other publications, and the main destination wouldn't be the Times, it would be ProPublica.com.
This is the aria that is sung by my web colleagues almost every day, and it has some very powerful notes to it. And we are working to improve our website, to use various techniques to increase the traffic to our site. But at this stage of the game, my judgment is that it is worthwhile to work on both sides of the street. They're both valuable, and yes, we could accelerate the progress of the website by having all of our content appear exclusively on it, but we would sacrifice the enormous leverage that we get, by taking examples of abuse of power and failure to uphold the public interest and getting them to the right audience today. So it's a tension. Your arguments are right and good, and I think the right thing for us now is to do both.
Mark, wouldn't you say that there is a degree to which this is true? You lead a news organization that is primarily on the web, but that is also partnering with legacy news organizations that has given it perhaps an extra reach. There's a bit of a parallel there, isn't it?
Yes, that's definitely true. I think that the place that ProPublica is different is that you've been able to recruit, and you have basically the cream of the crop. I mean, you have 17 reporters from out of 1,400, and these are all people who are basically the best of the best. And coming from when ProPublica was started, it was the idea of here, this is a new way of doing things, and we can, I would imagine that we're taking a stand, and you know what, we've got this money, and we're gonna say we're definitely going to be doing something different. We have a budget, and we have the staff, and we can say we're going to be the destination for hardcore, investigative, stick-it-to-the-man reporting, and ultimately that would maybe be doing something different. And I guess you can say that you want to. The mainstream media, the legacy publications are, they already have the distribution, but one of the things that I've learned quickly about working on the web is that it's all about content. Content is for sure king, and where for Neon Tommy, the stories that we've published, when we publish them on our site, they get distributed quickly and read quickly, and I would imagine that if you have the killer New Orleans story, which was amazing, presenting it online, people were reading it, and the New York Times is going to blog about it. They'll send you there, and the ultimate readership, I would think, would be similar, just because the story was so good.
It is a tension. I hear you, but I think that if you're dealing with issues, take the hydrofracking case, the drilling. I mean, our relentlessly pounding away at that. It took more than a year for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal to put a story about this, major story in their in their newspapers. It took about that long for Congress to pay attention. I mean, one of the key issues here is that under the 2005 energy bill, Vice President Cheney's energy bill, the EPA was excluded from monitoring dangers to the water supply from this drilling. I don't know what the rationale for that was, but you know, you've got a national process that is going on in 30 states. It's a huge industrial process, very complicated. One could make an argument that this is precisely what the EPA was created for, you know, all it takes is a couple of sentences in a new energy bill to reverse that. And if you you know, if you wait to you know, sort of build your perfect website, you miss an opportunity to get that message across. At the same time, you know, we know the way the world is going. 3 institutions that we partner with have since gone out of business, and we want our website to be more of a hub as time goes on, and we're working hard to make it so. But I think that just going into our that side of the activity would not be right.
So I know there are a lot of questions. Let's see, Judy and Bryce, Richie. Let's start there.
Yes, I'm interested in how the process of collaboration with broadcasters, 60 Minutes and NPR. Do you have any broadcast journalists on your staff? And if not, do you just bring the material, the investigation, in a nice wrapped package and say, here it is, and then they go make television? Or are you linked from the very first day on that project, working together? I mean, because it's so very different.
Yes, it is. We do not have senior broadcast people on our staff. Some of our younger people have, you know, experience doing, you know, the complete package, reporting, doing the stand-ups, doing the editing for, you know, for small television news operations around the country. But our basic approach is to go early to a audio or video partner, because they, as I'm sure you know, they need it. They want to have their reporters or correspondents be the ones doing the key interviews, and often they have to be there at the first interview because you only get one shot at the, you know, at the key person. And look, who would I rather have in the chair? You know, me or Scott Pelley? Believe me, I'd rather have Scott Pelley in the chair. So we, when we work with radio, television, cable, we go to them early. When we work with newspapers, we go late, you know, when we have the story in hand, because most newspapers, even though staffs have been reduced, have beat structures, and if you go early on with a story, they're working on it, you know. So, I mean, a quick example. We had a wonderful story with USA Today. One of our reporters found out that after 9/11, when the Air Marshal Service tried to expand very rapidly, they had 35 people on 9/11. They went to 3,500. They made some mistakes in hiring. They got some felons on board. If we had gone to USA Today and said, you know, we want to do a story with you about problems that the Air Marshal Service has had in hiring, they would say, thank you very much. We have 6 people. You know, we're the Bible of the road warrior. We're doing this. But if we could go to them and say, we found 30 people who used their badges to, I'm making up these numbers, I don't remember them, but, you know, 30 people who used their badges to smuggle drugs, a handful who used their badges to set up assignations with underage boys, one who used the badge to make a connection with a hitman who went by the name of the Crucifixer, who wanted to send his wife to the next airplane in the great beyond, and then a bunch of them who had convictions for drunk driving. Well, you know, absent an accident, an injury, most people in this country don't regard drunk driving as a huge offense. But think about it, you want somebody drunk with a gun on your plane. No, you don't. So when I told the editor of USA Today about the crucifixer, he said, "You're kidding me," although he used a stronger word. And there was no question of sort of saying that they had the story in hand. So you work with different people, different ways, and the partnership with USA Today was fabulous.
Right?
What do you say about your relationship with the Albany paper? I gather that your partners do not pay you for is there any payment ever made by a partner to subsidize your journalism, or do you think there are disadvantages from not paying you?
Right now, the goal was with such a terrible crush, particularly our first 2 years on the operators of major media, with the budget shrinking, with their ad revenues going down every month. They're going through 3 or 4 budget processes every year. If we were to go to them and say, we need to charge you for this, then you have to bring the publisher into the game, and then they have to start thinking about, well, if I pay these guys, do I have to lay off another reporter? You get all this outsourcing complaint in the newsroom. It just makes life much more difficult. So we thought, at least at the outset, we would make it simple. It's free. If it works for you, it works for us.
Richie, and then we'll move around this way. Yes.
Going briefly back to the issue of audience, you seem to have built up enough of an audience to try some crowdsourcing. I know there's a Super Bowl piece looking at how trying to get constituents involved with tracking their representatives and senators, and whether there's some lobbying going on and campaign fundraising, getting people to the Super Bowl. So I wonder if you could just talk about why you tried that and how successful it was.
I'm thrilled with the prospects here, and it's early days for us, but we are lucky enough to have Amanda Mickle, who did Off the Bus, which I think their co-creator is somewhere.
Mark Haggard. He's the one who told me it was Mickle when you and I were having that. I've been on that one, even though you got money.
She's brilliant, and she has put together a group of 3,000 volunteers who come from all walks of life. Some are former journalists, some are part-time journalists, but there are teachers, lawyers, engineers, kind of others. And we're just figuring out how to use them. We use them in our stimulus coverage, for example, which has been a major thrust for us. And we picked out 500 projects that we wanted to monitor very closely. And we just, Amanda typed, email, sending out messages, sign up for, had the list of projects, sign up if you want to monitor this project. And there's no way we could have done that. There's no way, with 700 journalists at the Wall Street Journal, I could have monitored 500 projects at once. So this is one way of interacting with them. Another way, you mentioned the Super Bowl thing. We decided we wanted to try to find out how many members of Congress would admit to going to the Super Bowl, and not that it's a crime. I'd love to go to the Super Bowl myself, but then we wanted to know how they got their tickets, because the NFL, which does have business before Congress, sells tickets at face value, and the face value, don't hold me to the number, but it's something like $700, and if you go on StubHub, you can see the market price is $1,800. Any banker knows this is the carry trade. You can get that, sort of get that leverage. Well, again, there was no way that we could call the office of every congressman and senator. But our network, got most of them. And now, they got obfuscating answers in some cases. 3 days before the Super Bowl, a number of officers said they didn't know whether their guy was going to the Super Bowl. So, yeah, it opens tremendous vistas for us, and we're just beginning to figure out how to use them.
You have a question, and then Marie?
Yes, I'm very curious about what you see in the future for enterprises like ProPublica. My two colleagues here and I are part of a brand new startup based at Annenberg, led by Michael Parks. Very similar in some ways to ProPublica, looking at healthcare in California. The question I keep wondering as we do this is this a model for the foreseeable future, or do you see a point where this becomes a for-profit operation, where if this is just the bridge to help us get to the new world, or is this the new world?
I think the answer is yes.
All of the above.
I could easily imagine your enterprise, if you wanted to take it that way, developing into a for-profit operation. There are things, there are also more and more nonprofits that are doing things other than investigative reporting as their main thrust, but they're adding on investigative reporting. There are for-profit operations that are starting up very much, what will people pay for, basically. And the growth is very small, but they are growing, and they have venture capital funding, and they have a philosophy of you eat what you kill what you eat. The money that they bring in, they can reinvest in the product and expand its size and expand the ambitions of it. So there are a tremendous number of different approaches going on, and the big virtue of for-profit is that if it's successful, it attracts replication, and so you get much faster expansion that way. The challenge for doing our kind of reporting is that it is so expensive. The editor of the New York Times Magazine did a back-of-the-envelope estimate of the total cost of Sherry's story, which included her reporting, her travel, her other expenses, plus his own editors, his own fact checkers, his photographers. He came up with a number of $450,000 is what that story cost to produce. Now, I think that's a little high, but even if it was $250,000, you cannot. There were stories that I supervised that cost that much at the Wall Street Journal. I managed to keep it secret from the finance people. But if you're solely focused, if all you're doing is this kind of reporting, it's very hard to charge enough to anyone, to readers, to partners, to anybody to pay the cost, which is why, at least at this stage, the nonprofit model has its attractions.
Having just come back from Japan, I assume you heard about Toyota.
What
have you heard there that you think ought to be pursued here that is not being pursued, or what your investigative reporters would be going after?
Well, I was there very, very quickly and wearing a different hat. I'm the chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and we were trying to get support for the mission of the committee among journalists and news organizations in Japan. What I heard about Toyota was great grief, embarrassment, and a determination to try to make it right, and a recognition that trying to keep something like this private is not a good idea.
Okay, let's see, Marvin and Spencer.
Well, I wanted to go back to the question that Mark asked before, which is, you've got this great advantage over other new media in that your website is monetized. You don't have to think about banner ads and CPMs. You've got $10 million, which is might not be a lot compared to the New York Times, but it's a lot compared to most web standards, or news web standards. So, just pushing you one more time on the question you were asked, do you feel that there's a risk that you're taking by, in a sense, putting too many of your eggs in the partnerships? You said that three of your partners went down. I understand from my myriad sources in ProPublica that some of your partners and potential partners have been quite reticent, not all of them, but you do encounter sometimes resistance from people saying, where has this thing been? It has to go through a whole number of edits, et cetera. All that to ask, do you think you run a chance of falling behind because you're not putting enough into your site as a final destination, and that 4 or 5 years down the line, if things continue to deteriorate with legacy media, you're going to be left with 60,000 page views instead of 80 million?
We're working really hard to make sure that doesn't happen, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to be successful. I keep putting more into the web operation because we have more to put on the site. The first 18 months, there wasn't that much. We now have an archive that gets more and more robust all the time, so there's more to work with. And I am quite confident that we'll make this happen. And if you look at the mission, which is to have impact in society, to give the public knowledge that it wouldn't get otherwise. The impact is not, the goal is not to build a great website, except as a pathway to achieving that goal. When you look at it that way, then I think it's not a close call, that the right answer is to work both sides of the street.
Spencer?
So, having been the editorial head of the Wall Street Journal, now the editorial head of ProPublica, I'm interested to hear you compare and contrast the relationships, if they are different, between you and the publisher of the Wall Street Journal and between you and the funders of a nonprofit.
It's actually quite similar. The publishers I worked for at the Wall Street Journal were fabulous. The board of directors and its chair, Herb Sandler, they are terrific to work for. And in each case, we did not tell people in advance what we're working on. We did not, and in fact, anyone who sits on our board has a commitment that they will not, they understand that they will not know in advance what we're working on. They are free to give us story ideas, but these story ideas have to come through me or Steve, because I just think it'd be intimidating for reporters to get a call from a director. The difference is that my bosses at the Journal were, for most of my time, they were Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. Peter Kahn and Karen House, and before that, Warren Phillips, who I don't know if Warren had a Pulitzer himself, but he certainly was a great journalist. Whereas the folks on our board are terrific, but they don't have journalistic experience. But aside from that, it's really very similar.
Just a quick aside, because I know that you know this, but not all our colleagues in the room know this. This has a special meeting because Spencer Sherman is with the California Healthcare Foundation, and Michael Parks is directing this new California Health Reporting Project, and Richard Kipling back there is the managing editor. And are you all the reporting staff? I was just thinking that. We're delighted to have all of you here with the California Health Reporting Project. We're doing a lot of these, kind of innovative things here as well. So, David, I guess you get the last one.
Well, we've seen a development at the state level now of quite a few investigative reporting nonprofits, and California Watch may be the largest, I guess, in terms of operations. Do you think that that's going to continue? Are we going to see maybe someday the California or investigative nonprofits at all 50 states?
I don't know, but I do think it's. It is a very exciting model. I mean, there's Texas Tribune, which is not entirely investigative. They're doing a lot of government and political coverage, but they certainly have an investigative component. And California Watch, there are, Rosie and Mark Hatches, just fabulous people running that, and there's also the Center for Public Integrity in Washington. You're on the board there, Jim.
I was chair of the board until I came out here and took this job and had to give it up. I'm still on the board.
But they are, I think, rejuvenated and have been doing some excellent work. I see a lot of opportunity for this. Different sized states will have different sets of problems and opportunities. There's a former colleague of mine at the LA Times that Bryce will remember, Rome Tempest, who has started something called Wirefile, which is not entirely investigative, but does investigative stuff in Wyoming. And the size of the state is such that you can't have a large infrastructure, but he's got enough so that he's able to do some impact. So each place is different.
Thank you so much, Paul. Very interesting. If you had additional questions or comments, and Paul, I think, is going to be here for a few minutes. So you're going to come up and join us for